She didn't ask for help. She never did. She just kept walking, through the snow that came up past her ankles, through the cold that had long since stopped feeling like cold and started feeling like nothing at all. 3 logs still clutched against her chest, like letting go of them would cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. She had been doing this since before dawn. She would do it again tomorrow. He was supposed to be inspecting the pack's borders, reviewing ledgers, confirming supply counts. The things kings did when they rode into failing packs and tried to understand, from a safe distance, how badly things had gone wrong. Instead, he was standing in the snow, perfectly still, watching her. She didn't see him. That was the thing that stopped him cold. Not the logs, not the dress that belonged to a warmer season, not the way her breath came in short, visible bursts against the December air. It was the fact that she didn't see him, because a woman who was being watched would have performed something. Straightened, slowed, made herself look less like she was one bad step away from the ground. She wasn't performing anything. This was just her life. He watched her navigate a patch of ice with the focused, economical precision of someone who had learned to survive in very small increments. One careful step at a time, and he felt something move through him that had nothing to do with the cold. Then her knees went, not dramatically, not with a sound. There was no cry, no desperate grab for a branch or a wall. She simply stopped. Her knees hit the snow first, then her hands, and the logs scattered across the white ground, and the last one she held until the very end. Fingers locked around it even as her cheek met the earth. He was moving before he'd made the decision to move. He reached her in 5 strides, dropped to one knee, turned her over, and that was when he saw it. The hollows beneath her cheekbones so deep they cast shadows, the sharp ridge of her collarbone. The thin fabric of her dress pulled taut over her ribs. 1, 2, 3, 4, each one visible, each one a verdict. He counted them the way he counted everything, methodically, quietly, the way a king assessed the full scope of damage before he decided what to do about it. His wolf went absolutely silent. That was how he knew it was serious. His wolf was never silent. He said nothing. He stayed kneeling in the snow beside her, while the wind moved through the pines and the distant sounds of the pack carried across the frozen grounds. And he looked at her, this woman whose name he didn't yet know, whose face was pale and still against the white ground. And he felt something ancient and furious turn over slowly in his chest. He stood. He turned to his head guard, who had stopped 3 paces back with the careful stillness of a man who understood when to give his king space. "Find Brennan," he said, quiet, even. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. 2 words, that was all, but every person within earshot understood that the inspection had just become something else entirely. Before we go into how it all started, if this story already has you hooked, make sure you subscribe to our page, hit like on this video, and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The Alpha King Cael dressed had a reputation for arriving unannounced and leaving people worse off than he found them, not out of cruelty, but out of precision. He had no patience for waste, no tolerance for performance, and a particular distaste for packlords who polished their presentation while their people went hungry. He had removed 3 packlords in the last 4 years. Each time he had done it quietly, without drama, with the same efficient finality he brought to everything. Ashvale Pack had been on his list for 2 years. He'd delayed because there was always something more pressing: border disputes, treaty negotiations, the endless grinding machinery of governing 6 territories. But the reports kept coming, each one a little worse than the last. And eventually, the numbers became impossible to rationalize away. He rode in on a grey morning, frost on the ground, sky the colour of old pewter, 4 guards behind him, no announcement, no advance courier. Lord Brennan had been caught entirely off guard and had spent the first 20 minutes of Cael's arrival doing what men like Brennan always did, smiling too widely, talking too fast, directing attention toward the things that still looked acceptable and away from the things that didn't. Cael had let him talk. He always let them talk. Men like Brennan inevitably said more than they intended to when they were nervous. He'd excused himself from the main hall after an hour, citing a need to review the outer grounds, and walked alone through the eastern edge of the pack territory, while his guards maintained a respectful distance. The morning was very cold and very quiet, and the further he walked from Brennan's carefully maintained central buildings, the more the truth of Ashvale became visible. Roof tiles missing, firewood stores running dangerously low for December. Children in the yard of the eastern cottages wearing coats that belonged to a smaller season. He catalogued each detail without expression, the way he always did, saving the reaction for later, when he was alone. He had been about to turn back when he saw her. She was coming from the direction of the wood pile, which was in the furthest corner of the grounds. Further than it needed to be, he noted. Further than made any practical sense unless someone had specifically arranged things to make the task as difficult as possible. She was carrying 3 logs stacked against her chest, her arms wrapped around them from below, her chin tilted up slightly to see past them. She wore a grey dress and no coat. Her hair was pulled back loosely, the wind pulling strands of it across her face. She didn't stop to push them away. Cael stopped walking. He stood at the tree line and watched, and his first thought, clinical, reflexive, was that the load was too heavy for her frame. His second thought, slower and less comfortable, was that she clearly knew that and was carrying it anyway, which meant she didn't have a choice. His wolf stirred, just slightly, just enough to make him aware of it. He told it to be still. He watched her cross the frozen yard with the careful, deliberate gait of someone rationing energy. No wasted movement, no looking around, complete focus on the ground in front of her. She had probably made this trip 6 times already this morning. He could tell by the way she moved, not tired the way someone gets tired after 1 or 2 trips, but the deeper tiredness that lives in the body and doesn't lift. She hit the ice patch 10 feet from the cottage door. Her left foot slipped first. She corrected, fast, impressive, the logs lurching but not falling, and for a moment he thought she had it. Then the correction overcorrected, and the right foot went, and there was nothing graceful or dramatic about what happened next. She went down the way people go down when they've been running on empty for too long, and the body simply decides it's finished negotiating. He was beside her in seconds. She was conscious, eyes open, blinking up at the grey sky with an expression of profound, exhausted irritation, like a woman mentally rearranging her morning around this unexpected interruption. She hadn't registered him yet. He turned her carefully, checked her head, found no blood. Then he saw the rest of it, and something in his chest went very quiet. The dress was wrong for December, by at least 2 layers. The hands he was holding were reddened, jabbed at the knuckles, with the specific roughness of someone who worked with them constantly and never had enough time for them to properly heal. And the ribs were what stopped him. Visible through the fabric in a way they shouldn't have been, the kind of visible that had a story behind it, a long and specific story about whose table she sat at and whose portions she got. Count them, his wolf said with a quietness that wasn't calm at all. Count everyone. He did. She blinked and focused on him, and he watched the sequence move across her face. Confusion. Recognition of his rank from the crest on his cloak, and then a controlled, deliberate blankness. The expression of someone who had learned that showing reaction to powerful people rarely served them well. "Your Majesty," she said. Her voice was steady. He noted that, steadier than most men he'd interviewed that morning. He said nothing. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked up at his guard and spoke 2 words. "Find Brennan." He helped her to a sitting position, retrieved the scattered logs without comment, and stacked them neatly beside her. Then he stood, brushed the snow from his knee, and walked back toward the main hall with the even, unhurried stride of a man who has made a very large decision and is simply working out the order of operations. "Her name," his wolf said, following close at his heels, metaphorically speaking. "You didn't ask her name." "I know," Cael thought. "You're going to, though." He didn't answer, but he also didn't argue. Maren woke to warmth, which was wrong. Not the vague, fitful warmth of her own body heat conserved under thin blankets, but actual warmth, radiant, and even coming from a direction that made no sense for her usual corner of the pack infirmary. She lay still for a moment without opening her eyes, cataloguing the wrongness of it the way she catalogued everything. Methodically, without panic, starting with what she could confirm, and working outward. Smell, herbs, clean cloth, candle wax, normal for the infirmary. Sound, wind outside, distant voices, the particular quiet of a building mid-morning. Wait, there was a blanket on her that was heavier than anything in the infirmary's inventory. She knew the infirmary's inventory. She had been managing it, poorly supplied as it was, for 3 years. She opened her eyes. The blanket was dark wool, well-made, the kind that cost real money. Beside her cot, on the small table that usually held only a water cup and whatever medicinal preparation she was currently testing, someone had placed a plate. Not a scrap plate, a proper plate with bread that was still faintly warm, sliced meat, a small wedge of cheese. Maren sat up slowly, waited for the familiar head rush to pass, and looked at the food for a long moment. She ate. She asked no questions. She had learned long ago that questions about unexpected kindness had a way of making it disappear. It was only later, when one of the younger pack members came in for a routine check and mentioned, with wide eyes, that the Alpha King had extended his inspection by 7 days, that Maren understood the blanket and the food were connected to the man she'd looked up at from the frozen ground, and immediately wished she hadn't. Not because he'd been unkind. He hadn't been unkind at all. He'd been something more unsettling, careful, like a person doing an assessment rather than a greeting. She told herself it was simply what kings did, assessed things. She went back to work. Lord Brennan was not having a good week. This was apparent to everyone in Ashvale who could read the signs. His too loud laugh at dinner, the way he kept finding reasons to position himself near the Alpha King's shoulder, the small, desperate adjustments he was making to things that should have been addressed years ago. Firewood was suddenly being redistributed more fairly. The Eastern cottages had received a repair crew. 2 of the pack members who had gone without adequate winter clothing had mysteriously found parcels outside their doors. None of it went unnoticed by the man doing the inspecting. Cael moved through Ashvale the way he moved through everything, without urgency, without announcement, seeing more than people realized he was seeing. He met with each department, reviewed each ledger, asked the kind of specific questions that indicated he had already read the summary documents and was now testing for the places where the summary and the reality diverged. They diverged in Ashvale, in almost every area. He kept seeing Maren, not deliberately, or so he told himself. But Ashvale was not a large pack, and she moved through it constantly, to the storeroom, to the Eastern cottages where she checked on the elderly and the young, to the small treatment room that served as the pack's medical facility, which was, Cael noted with a jaw that kept needing to be deliberately unclenched, stocked with approximately a third of what it should have held. She moved quietly. She didn't speak much, but when she did, people listened. Not because she demanded it, but because she was almost always saying something worth hearing. He watched her talk a frightened young boy through a wound dressing with such calm patience that the boy forgot to cry. He watched her negotiate with perfect composure with the pack supply master for resources she clearly wasn't going to fully receive, and accept the partial victory without visible bitterness. He watched her notice the things people needed before they said them. A chair adjusted for someone's bad hip, a cup of something warm left at an elder's door. She does that naturally, his wolf said, on the third evening, with the satisfied tone of someone stating something that has been obvious for days. She notices. She does, Cael agreed despite himself. We notice things too. We noticed her first. That's not the same thing, isn't it? On the fourth day, Cael sat alone in the records room, with Ashvale's resource ledgers spread across the table, and worked through them with the focused attention they deserved. It took 2 hours. By the end of it, he had a clear and complete picture of where Ashvale's resources had gone for the past 4 years. And the picture was not complicated. Everything that should have been distributed had been redirected. The redirection was careful enough to be deniable in isolation, but obvious when you looked at the whole. He turned to the personnel records, found Maren's file. Read it in under a minute because there was almost nothing in it. Name, age, function, classification. Non-essential personnel. He read it twice. Then he set the file down with the particular care of a man who is controlling something very large and very quiet, and sat for a moment in the empty records room while the winter light moved across the table, and thought about a woman carrying logs in a December dress who hadn't made a sound when she fell. Non-essential, his wolf said, with a low, dangerous edge that was entirely new. Non-essential. She kept 3 people alive last winter with what they gave her. I know because I read the mortality records in the corner pile. So had Cael. He rose from the table, gathered the ledgers, and went to find Brennan. The storm came in on the 5th day and shut the pack down to its bones. Maren had known it was coming since morning. She could read weather the way she read symptoms, in the early signs that most people ignored, until they couldn't anymore. She'd spent the day preparing, checking on the elders, making sure the eastern cottages had enough fuel to last, stocking the treatment room with what little she had. By the time the snow started in earnest, she was in the storeroom, candle lit against the early dark, working through her herb inventory by touch and habit. The storeroom was the warmest place she had consistent access to. She had never said this to anyone. It was simply a fact of her life that she had arranged herself around. She heard the footsteps in the corridor and didn't look up, because footsteps in this corridor almost always meant someone who needed something, and she was almost always in a position to help with it. Then she registered the weight of them, the particular deliberate quality, and looked up. He filled the doorway completely. He'd left his outer cloak somewhere, and without it he looked simultaneously less imposing and more so, the king's formal authority stripped back to reveal the actual person underneath, who was broad-shouldered and direct-eyed and taking up space in her doorway with the uncomplicated ease of someone who didn't think about taking up space. "I was looking for the estate records," he said. Maren looked at him for a moment. "The estate records are in the east wing," she said. "Third room on the left." A pause. "I know," he said. Neither of them mentioned this further. He stepped into the storeroom, looked around at the shelves with the same quiet attention he seemed to give everything, and after a moment crouched to read the labels on the lower jars, with what appeared to be genuine interest. "You organised these by application," he said, "not by name." "It's faster," she said. "When someone's hurt, you don't have time to translate botanical names into what you actually need." He nodded slowly, as though filing this away somewhere. "You trained formally." "My mother trained me. She was the pack healer before me." A pause she hadn't planned. "She died in the fever outbreak 6 years ago." He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone waiting for the conversation to move on, but the silence of someone actually sitting with what had just been said. "I'm sorry," he said, and it was so plainly meant that she didn't know what to do with it. "She didn't die of the fever," Maren said, which she hadn't intended to say. "She died of exhaustion after. We contained the outbreak, but it took 3 months, and by the end of it she had nothing left." She turned a jar in her hands. "I think about that sometimes, whether I would have made a different choice, whether she would have. Would she have?" Maren thought about her mother, small, relentless, with the same careful hands and the same habit of noticing things. "No," she said, "neither of us would." He was still crouched by the lower shelf, but he was looking at her now rather than the jars. "My mother died when I was 9, he said, simply, without asking for anything in return for the information. "Fever as well. I've hated them ever since with a specificity that probably seems irrational." "It doesn't," Maren said. "No," he said. "I imagine it wouldn't to you." She reached for a jar on the high shelf, dried ashwort, which she needed for the preparation she was working on, and felt her sleeve slip back as she stretched. She felt him go still before she registered, "Why?" And then she understood. The scar tissue along her forearm, silvery and uneven. Frostbite scarring from the previous winter. Not dramatic. "Just there, last winter," she said, before he could ask. Matter-of-factly, the way she discussed most things about herself. "I was out too long checking on the Adel family in the northern cottage. It was my own fault. I misjudged the temperature drop. It wasn't her fault, and they both knew it wasn't her fault, and neither of them said so." He simply stood, reached past her to the high shelf with an ease that required no stretching at all, retrieved the jar of ashwort, and placed it in her hands. Close. His wolf nodded, with enormous approval. "Very close. Did you smell her? She smells like..." Cael returned to a professional distance, without acknowledgement. They worked in the same space for a while after that, which was strange and not unpleasant. He asked careful questions. She answered them more fully than she intended to. The storm moved outside, pressing against the stone walls, and the candle threw warm light across the shelves and the space between them. "Why do you stay?" he asked, eventually. He wasn't looking at her when he said it. He was examining a preparation she'd made, reading the label she'd written in her small, precise script. But the question landed with a weight that suggested it hadn't been casual. She thought about it honestly. She owed him that, she decided, for the blanket and the food and the way he'd said "I'm sorry" like he meant it. "Where would I go?" she said. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "That's not actually an answer," he said. She looked at him. "No," she agreed. "It isn't. Tell her," his wolf said. "Tell her she could go anywhere. Tell her she could..." He said nothing. The storm said enough for both of them. The courier arrived on the 6th morning, and Cael read the letter alone in the room Ashfael had given him, which smelled like cold stone and the particular loneliness of borrowed spaces. Lady Seraphine of House Vaughan. The wedding date moved forward. The council required his return within the fortnight. The alliance had been in negotiation for 18 months. Borders, trade routes, the mutual defense of the Southern Territories, and it was necessary and logical, and he had agreed to it 18 months ago, with the calm, considered decision-making of a man who had long since accepted that his personal life was a resource to be allocated strategically. He read the letter, twice, folded it, set it on the table. Then he sat for a while in the cold room and thought about a woman who organised her herbs by application because there wasn't time to translate things when people were hurting, who had looked up at him from the snow with eyes that were steady even when the rest of her was failing, who had told him without drama or self-pity that her mother had died of exhaustion saving people who had, apparently, rewarded that sacrifice by classifying her daughter as non-essential. "You're doing it again," his wolf said. "The thing where you sit very still and feel things very loudly and tell yourself you aren't. I'm reviewing a logistical problem. You're reviewing the angle of her jaw when she looked at the ashwort jar. Different thing." Cael picked up the letter and went to find Maren. He didn't examine this decision closely. She had taken over a corner of the preparation room, the one with the best window light, which she'd clearly been using as a workspace throughout his stay because there were notes in her handwriting pinned to the stone beside it, and a particular arrangement of tools that spoke of settled habit. She was bent over something when he came in, and she looked up with the unhurried quality of someone who didn't startle easily. He sat at the other end of the workbench without asking. She moved one of her preparations to give him room, without comment. They had developed, over the past 2 days, a working proximity that felt easy in a way he hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure what to do with. He set the letter on the bench between them. She looked at it, looked at the seal, looked back at her preparation without touching it. She didn't ask. She was too careful to ask. But he felt the quality of the silence change, the way silence did when a person was managing something they didn't want visible. "There are documented cases," she said, after a while, her voice completely even, her attention apparently on the preparation she was working on, of proximity bonds forming between compatible wolves under high-stress situations. They present as heightened awareness, an increased sense of the other person's location, occasional emotional, bleed. They're usually temporary. He looked at her for a long moment. "Usually," he said. "Almost always," she said. Silence. "Maren." "Don't," she said, quietly. Not unkindly, just firmly, in the tone of a woman who has done the mathematics of a situation and arrived at the only sensible conclusion. "Don't say anything that's going to make the fortnight harder than it needs to be. You have obligations. I understand obligations. They don't become optional because the timing is bad." He looked at her profile, the line of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the way she was being so deliberate with her hands, and thought about the letter on the bench between them and the 18 months of careful decision-making that had produced it. He said nothing. He stayed for another 2 hours. When he left, he did not look at the letter. He left it on the bench and let her decide what to do with it. She put it in the fire, which she felt somehow 2 corridors away, without being able to say how he knew. "She's protecting you," his wolf said, with something that sounded dangerously like grief. "From yourself. She's very good at protecting things that can't protect themselves." Yes, Cael thought. That's going to be a problem for you. He knew that too. Brennan had been watching all of this with the calculating attention of a man whose primary skill was identifying leverage. He had seen the Alpha King extend his stay. He had seen the extra food and the blanket. He had watched Cael walk into Maren's workspace twice and emerge on both occasions looking like a man who had gone in for one conversation and come out needing to sit quietly somewhere, Brennan understood that Maren had become, without her knowledge or consent, very important to a very powerful person. He understood what that meant for him, and on the 6th night, when Cael's guards were occupied with the evening shift change, Brennan sat at his desk and signed a document he had been holding in reserve, a pack transfer order, citing Maren's non-essential classification, arranging for her relocation to the Northern Labour Camp, effective the day after the Alpha King's departure. He signed it, sealed it, and felt, for the first time in 6 days, like he had some control back. He was, in this, profoundly mistaken. Cael found the transfer order on the 7th morning, one of Brennan's lower clerks, a young man with the expression of someone who had been doing things he didn't feel good about for long enough that it was starting to show. Slid it under the records room door, wrapped in a page of his own handwriting that said only, "I thought you should know." Cael unfolded it. Read it again, carefully, in case the first reading had produced an error. It hadn't. His wolf stopped pacing the way it had been pacing for 6 days and went very, very still. "Do something," it said, not urgently, with a cold certainty that was somehow worse than urgency. "Do everything." Cael set the document on the table. He straightened his crest. He rolled up the sleeves of his shirt with the efficient calm of a man preparing to work. He sent for Brennan's full ledger archive, 4 years, every page. He sent for the pack census records, the supply manifests, the distribution logs, the personnel files. He sent for the records of every resource allocation that had come through royal channels into Ashvale since Brennan's appointment. Then he sat down and went through all of it. It took 4 hours. By the end of it, Cael had built, from Brennan's own documentation, a complete and legally watertight account of 4 years of systematic resource theft, personnel mistreatment, falsified reporting to the Crown, and, on 3 specific occasions, deliberate deprivation of medical supplies to pack members who had subsequently died of conditions that were treatable. He read those 3 names slowly. He let them settle. Then he sent for Brennan and for Maren, and he held the meeting in the main hall with his guards at the doors and the assembled ledgers on the table between them. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. The voice he used was the quiet one, the one that had learned over years of difficult conversations. That volume was a tool for people who needed to perform authority, and that real authority didn't need performance. He laid out the evidence with the methodical clarity of someone who had been building this case for 4 hours and had left no gaps in it. Brennan's wolf submission happened midway through the second ledger. It was immediate and complete and deeply humiliating, which was exactly what it was meant to be. Maren stood beside the table through all of it. She hadn't been told why she was there. She watched Brennan fold and watched Cael dismantle 4 years of comfortable dishonesty with the expression of someone who is watching a thing she had believed was permanent turn out not to be. When it was done, when Brennan had been formally stripped of his position, placed under pack law custody pending Crown judgment, and escorted from the hall with whatever dignity he had left, which was not much, the room went quiet. Cael looked at Maren across the table. She looked back at him with the careful, contained expression she wore when she didn't yet know what something cost. "He was going to transfer me," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes." "After you left." "Yes." She absorbed this with a stillness he had come to recognize as her processing something large. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. He held her gaze. "I wanted to." The distinction hung in the air between them. She heard it. He watched her hear it. He crossed to the table, picked up the final document, the one he drafted himself that morning, in the brief hour between reading the transfer order and sending for the ledgers. and slid it toward her. She looked at it, read it once, looked back at him. Royal designation, she said. You answer to the crown. No pack alpha has authority over your placement, your resources, or your classification. He kept his voice even. Non-essential is no longer a category that applies to you under any administrative framework. Her jaw was tight. She was fighting something he could feel through the bond's low, persistent hum. Not unhappiness. Something more complicated. Relief that had nowhere good to go. Gratitude that sat badly on someone who had been taking care of themselves for too long to receive it gracefully. This isn't because of... She stopped. Started again. This is because it's right, she said carefully. Not because of anything else. He looked at her for a moment. Both, he said. Honestly, both. But primarily because it's right, and it should have been done 3 years ago, and the fact that it wasn't is something I intend to take up with the appointment system when I return to the capital. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, close to one. He left the next morning. He did not let himself look back at the gate. He rode with his guards in the grey early light, the road north unrolling ahead of him. The capital 10 hours away, the letter from Seraphine folded in his interior pocket. He had a kingdom to return to, a council, an alliance that had been in negotiation for 18 months and that represented by every rational measure the right decision. He made it 4 miles. He knew he'd made it 4 miles because he'd been counting. Turn around, his wolf said. He had responsibilities. Turn around. He had obligations. He had made commitments. He was a king, not a man who turned around because something in his chest felt like a thread being pulled taut, and he was riding further from it with every stride. Turn around. He pulled his horse to a stop at the crossroads. He sat there for a long time. The road north, the road back. The thing was, he had been making the rational decision for his entire life. He had been allocating himself strategically, responsibly, with the measured judgment of someone who understood what the crown required and had accepted it. He thought about a woman counting logs on a frozen morning. He thought about her voice, even and steady, from the ground. Your Majesty. He thought about the way she'd said I know when he told her he wanted to do something. Just, I know. Like she'd been waiting a long time for someone to want to do things, simply because they wanted to. He thought about the Seraphine letter, and the council's timeline, and the 18 months of careful negotiation. Then he turned his horse around and rode back. Maren was in the storeroom when she heard them. She recognized the sound of his horse before the stable boy came to tell her. She had learned the particular rhythm of that arrival over 7 days without intending to, the same way she had learned everything about him that she hadn't meant to, without looking for it, just by paying attention, which was the thing she did that she couldn't seem to stop doing. She stayed where she was. She kept working. She told herself, firmly and without sentiment, that there were 100 sensible reasons for a king to return to a pack the day after leaving it, none of which had anything to do with her. She was midway through cataloguing the new supplies shipment, which had arrived that morning, royal seal on the crate, twice the quantity she'd been requesting for 3 years, when she heard the footsteps in the corridor. She knew them. She kept her eyes on the jars. He filled the doorway, same as before, without the outer cloak, taking up exactly the amount of space he always took up, which was slightly more than anyone else seemed to require without it ever feeling like imposition. He looked at her with the expression she had come to identify over 7 days of careful observation as his real one, not the king's face, the other one underneath it. The courier, she said. She kept her voice level. Lady Seraphine. The wedding... I sent a letter to the council this morning. He said it simply. like it was not an enormous thing, from the crossroads. Seraphine will be relieved, honestly. She wanted the alliance. She did not particularly want me. Maren set down the jar she was holding with great deliberateness. That's not a small thing to undo, she said. No, he agreed, crossing the room slowly, not closing all the distance, leaving her room. It's a very large thing. A pause. You're worth a very large thing. She looked at him for a long time. She was doing the things she always did, running the mathematics of it, looking for the catch, checking the load-bearing walls for cracks. It was how she survived. It was how she'd always survived. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. It came out plainly, without apology, because she was too tired for apology. I don't know what to do when someone... She stopped. I've been the person who takes care of things for a long time. I don't have any practice at being taken care of, he said. I was going to say receiving anything that wasn't contractual. I know. He was standing 3 feet from her. Learn, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him. She looked at this man who had counted her ribs in the snow and then spent a week quietly dismantling every structure that had made her countable. Who had finished a transfer document in the time it took her to understand she'd been betrayed. Who had, apparently, turned around at the crossroads. She crossed the room. She picked up his hand. He went completely still, watching her, and turned it over and pressed her fingertips to the inside of his wrist, where his pulse beat strong and fast and not quite even. You're nervous, she said. Yes, he said it without flinching. I am. The Alpha King, she said, and there was the edge of something in it that wasn't quite teasing but was adjacent to it, is nervous. The Alpha King, he said, with great dignity and no dignity at all, would very much like to stop being assessed and start being answered. She looked up at him. She looked at his face, the careful jaw, the amber eyes that were, at this moment, doing nothing careful at all. And she thought about 7 days of borrowed warmth she hadn't known how to accept, and a blanket she'd kept folded at the foot of her cot, and the way he'd reached past her for the jar on the high shelf, without making it mean anything, and it had meant everything. The bond, she started. Isn't why, he said. It's just how I found out. He turned his hand under hers and held it carefully, like something he was choosing rather than assuming. I need you to know the difference. She did. She stepped forward, closed the remaining distance, and kissed him. And it was nothing like she had imagined in the hypothetical space she hadn't let herself occupy. It was better, slower. His hand came up to her face with a gentleness completely at odds with his size, and he kissed her back the way he did everything that mattered, with his full and undivided attention, holding nothing in reserve. When they parted, she pressed her forehead against his shoulder and stayed there for a moment, breathing, feeling the warmth of him through the fabric, the steady, solid reality of someone who had turned around at the crossroads. I'm going to need to close things up here properly, she said, before I go anywhere. I know. His arms came around her. Take whatever time you need. I'll wait. You might be waiting a while, I'm aware. A pause, and she could hear the smile in it. I find I have very few other pressing commitments at the moment. She laughed. She hadn't expected to, and it came out small and genuine, and a little undignified, and she felt his arms tighten around her in response, like the sound of it was something he intended to collect. His wolf, which had been miraculously quiet for the last 10 minutes, made its presence known. Told you, it said, with the deep and bottomless satisfaction of an animal that has been right about something for 7 days and has been waiting patiently for the chance to say so. Told you, from the first rib. She was always ours. You just needed to turn around. Yes, Cael thought. his chin resting against Maren's hair, the storeroom warm around them, the winter pressing at the windows like something that had lost its power to reach them. He just needed to turn around. If this story moved you, made you smile, or had you whispering "turn around" at your screen, you're one of us. Subscribe to our page so you never miss a new story. Hit like, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, and let us know whose story you want to hear next. We read every single one. See you in the next one.